guys, welcome back to my channel and welcome back to day 3 in palette week. Today we are going to be talking about my most reached for palettes of 2019 as well as my least reached for palettes this year. So I'm going to be sharing my top 5 most reached for as well as my bottom 5 least reached for palettes. If that sounds interesting to you, then stay tuned. First, if you haven't already subscribed to my channel, I hope you'll consider doing so before you go. I post videos 5 days a week, so if that interests you at all, I hope you'll consider subscribing. And other than that, let's just jump into the video. Alright guys, so we are going to jump into least reached for first, and up first is a palette that I purchased this year. I talked about this yesterday in my ranking palettes video. It's my Melt Smoke Sessions palette. I just don't find this to be wearable at all. Even the shimmers are not like the most wearable, so if I'm going to wear this palette, it's going to be obviously on a day that I don't work, which really limits the amount of days that I can wear this, and even then I'm like typically reaching for other palettes over this. I still like having this palette in my collection, but I probably wouldn't recommend this palette. It's expensive, and again, I just don't feel like it's the most wearable. It's very not wearable, actually, in my opinion. So this is one that I really have not reached for much at all this year. Next up is a palette that also has a green theme to it. It is the Huda Emerald Obsessions palette. I actually considered decluttering this, but I've been so into shimmery green shades that I just could not get myself to declutter this yet. This was in my Pan Those Eyeshadows project at the beginning of the year, and that's really the only reason this got any use this year, because I was trying to pan, I believe it was this shade right here. So I maybe used this, it was definitely less than 10 times this year. Less than 10 times. I just feel like this formula is not the same as the original Huda Beauty Obsessions palette. And not to mention, it's just a straight up green palette. So it's not a palette that I can wear every single day. There are still some pretty shimmers in here. I feel like this will probably end up getting decluttered next year though. A palette that I will be decluttering before the end of the year is my Wet n Wild Comfort Zone palette. I just never reached for this. I maybe reached for this 3 times this year, maybe. And even though the quality is okay, or is pretty good, honestly, especially for the drugstore, I hate saying that, but it is. I feel like I have these shades in other palettes, and I'm usually reaching for those other palettes over this one. I just never am like, ooh, I want to wear my Wet n Wild Comfort Zone palette today. So I barely reached for this at all this year, and I will be decluttering this before the end of the year. A palette that I used to love but just did not reach for much at all this year was the Too Faced Sweet Peach palette. I actually have pan in one of the shades in this palette, and I have some good dips going on a couple other shades throughout this palette. I used to wear this palette like every single day, and I feel like just better quality palettes have come out since then. This isn't something that I'm ready to part ways with yet. Maybe at some point next year I will, but I love this shade. Luscious is like one of my favorite champagne shimmer shades throughout my entire collection still. So I feel like I'm having trouble convincing myself to get rid of it. I know it doesn't make sense to keep a palette for one shade, and I could just pop that out and put it in the Z palette or something. Still not ready to part ways with this, but I think I have worn this less than 5 times this year. And then the last palette that has not gotten much use for me this year is my Jaclyn Hill palette. This was her collaboration with Morphe, the 35 pan eyeshadow palette. And the biggest reason I haven't reached for this year is just because it's a huge 35 pan eyeshadow palette. And I don't know why, but it just pains me to reach for a palette this big. I really would like to pull this out and start using it some more, because I do think the quality is nice. It's not my favorite by any means. I just feel a little bit overwhelmed when I reach into this palette. Even though there's tons of neutral shades, I just feel overwhelmed to reach for a 35 pan eyeshadow palette. So I think I've maybe used this like 3 to 5 times this year. Again, has not gotten much use out of me. I have considered decluttering this, but I just cannot get myself to do it yet. So wanted to mention that, but this is definitely another very unloved palette from this year. Okay, and then jumping into my most used palettes. Top 5 most used. This is like a rough estimate, but these stick out the most in my mind. So jumping into this one first, this is my Born to Run palette, and I do have pan in this shade right here, Riff. This was in my Pan Those Eyeshadows series this year, and I got so much use out of this. I took this traveling with me multiple times this year. I really do enjoy this palette. I do feel like I got a little bit burnt out because I was it took me so long to hit pan in this shade. I feel like the pans are like pretty deep for such like small squares, and I don't know, it just took me forever to hit pan on that matte shade. I actually just recently reached into this palette again and forgot how much I love it. I love the look that I created with the palette. I love this Ignite shade, and I love the shade Blaze as an inner corner highlight. It is a really cool shade. I don't know if swatching it will do it justice, but it's it almost has like a gold, pink, yellow reflect. It's such a cool shade on the eyes. I absolutely love this. I'm so happy to have this palette in my collection. I think for the everyday consumer, this is a really nice palette because you're offered a lot of variety within this palette. You have a lot of options to do neutral looks, but then you have fun pops of color, but I feel like they're not intimidating. This palette just isn't intimidating. It makes sense to me the way that it's laid out. It's cohesive, and I just really do love this palette from Urban Decay. I know that this has like been on sale, etc. I don't know if it was being discontinued or is. I don't know if you can still get this, but I definitely recommend this one from Urban Decay. This is the newest palette to my collection out of all the ones that I'm going to talk about. In fact, this is the only palette that I'm going to talk about in my top 5 that I purchased this year, and it is the Jackie Aina ABH palette. I just fell in love with this palette from the moment that I got it, and I have used this a ton. I just appreciate the mattes that they selected in this, and then the shimmers are just absolutely outstanding and beautiful. I love Sponsored, Lituation, Zon, Soleil. This red shimmer shade is beautiful. Everything about this palette I appreciate, I love. I feel like this just adds a lot to my collection. I feel inspired when I reach into this palette. I feel like this is a very unique palette, and while it has a variety of color in my opinion, again, I don't feel like it's an intimidating palette. I feel like it's a palette that even if you aren't a makeup artist, if you're not very, artistic, I feel like you can look into this and you can figure out tons and tons and tons of different looks that you can create with this. So I really love this one from ABH, highly recommend it, and this has gotten a ton of use out of me this year. Huda Smoky Obsessions. First of all, I just love the Huda Obsessions palette minus the gemstone line, which was, that emerald one was part of the gemstone line, but specifically Huda Smoky, and this was the last of the 6 original palettes that I picked up. Coral actually was probably the last because it released later, but I wasn't gonna pick this up just because I don't know, at the point in time before I purchased this, I wasn't like, cool tones weren't as cool. I personally have always loved cool tones, but felt like I had to not love cool tones and could only love warm tones when warm tones were the trend. But I freaking love cool tones, and I've gotten so much use out of this. This has come traveling with me every time I've traveled this year, whether it be on an airplane, in a car, for one night, for a week. This has come with me anytime I've been traveling because I just love it. I can use this shade right here as a one shade and done look. I can create a light eye look with this. I can create a super smoldering smoky eye with this. I just love everything about this palette. $27, very easy to travel with. I can never say enough good things about the Huda Obsessions palettes. Highly recommend, and Smoky is definitely my favorite, and definitely the one in my collection that has gotten the most use out of me this year. This next one you can no longer get, which bums me out, but I love this palette, and this is the BH Cosmetics Weekend Festival palette. I just love this palette, and looking into this palette, it wouldn't look like a palette that I would be drawn to or would like, but I love it. I have gotten so much use out of this palette. I have pan in this boho shade. I have a dip in Escape, a good dip going in Escape. I have a dip in Hipster. I have a good dip going in Trixie. I've used Flash a lot. I actually have used this shimmery purple shade quite a bit, and this Carnival shade is currently going in my Pan Those Eyeshadows project. This palette is just insanely good quality at such an affordable cost, and I just loved every look, or have loved every look that I've created with this. I'm always inspired and very excited to reach in for this. Any day that I use this just like brings warmth to my heart. I just truly get excited when I reach into this palette, and I use this so much. This year this also came traveling with me many times, And I'm just so excited to continue to use this. So happy to have this in my collection. So bummed you can't get this anymore, but this is definitely one of the top 5 most used palettes for my collection this year. And then the last palette, by the way, these were not really in any particular order. The Tartelette in Bloom. I love this palette. This is like an OG just staple. It has the cool tones, which I love. It's laid out in a way that makes sense. It's super easy to use and work with. Mine is definitely getting old and my quality is definitely not as good as when I first purchased this palette. I do have pan on 4 shades in this palette: Charmer, Flower Child, Funny Girl, and Smarty Pants. And I have really good dips on Sweetheart, Jet Setter, Rocker, and Firecracker. I've used this so much. This is my staple go-to if I just need to run out the door. I know I'm gonna love the look that I create with this. I just cannot say enough good things about this palette. Now, I do think there are better quality eyeshadow formulas on the market, but for some reason I just am drawn to this, and I always come back to this palette over and over and over again. So I couldn't lie to you guys. I couldn't. This is definitely in my top 5 most used, even though it's like literally one of the oldest palettes in my collection. After that, you guys, that is going to wrap up today's video, my top 5 most used palettes as well as my least used palettes. Leave me a comment down below and let me know what palettes you used the most this year, as well as the ones that did not get much love from you throughout your collection. Would love to hear from you guys. Thank you so much for sticking around to watch today's video, and I'll catch you in tomorrow's. Bye!